Since Beyond Light, there has been 340 unique weapons released in Destiny 2, and almost none of them really matter. Between the uninteresting looking reskins, the reprisal of old weapons with modern twists, and the fact that build crafting around never-ending abilities is just genuinely way more fun, is it any wonder that people are just sort of done with weapons right now? I've spent the last 2 years reviewing weapons in Destiny 2, and I've seen firsthand how the tone of all of your comments under my videos has shifted. It's gone from, damn, I can't wait to give this a try, to, damn, did Bungie pay you to like this weapon? What's happened in the last couple of years to make people feel this way? Well, I've given it some serious thought, and I think it comes down to 4 main factors that are all doing their bit to amplify the apathy surrounding weapons. I've got good reason to believe that Destiny 2 has a serious weapons problem, and after this, you will too. You'll feel it whether you're on controller, mouse and keyboard, or even something more exotic like this video's sponsor, the ROG Ally. This tiny little thing is a fully fledged Windows 11 PC that you can take anywhere with you. It'll run anything from Steam to the Epic Game Store to Xbox Game Pass and more. And yes, I checked, this definitely can run Destiny 2 and is the best way to play our favorite game on the go. The performance is fantastic for a device of this size, with the 1080p 120Hz touchscreen panel ensuring that you get to gloriously experience the very latest selection of Destiny 2 error codes. The Ally is a super comfortable device to hold, which is perfect for those long sessions where you're tweaking the minutiae of your builds. It's super lightweight, it doesn't get too hot, and it's very durable. Every input, including the 2 back buttons, can be customized to your heart's content through the inbuilt software Armory Crate. With the Ally, you've got a lot of options. You can take it anywhere with you as a handheld on the go, hook it up to a TV with a controller, or even connect a monitor, mouse, and keyboard for the full desktop experience. This tiny little thing is an absolute powerhouse. Click the link in the description below to learn more about the ROG Ally, and a big thank you to ROG for sponsoring this video. Now, back to the topic at hand. The first issue is the crux of it all. There's just far too many weapons now in Destiny 2, and most of them don't do much for anyone. Accounting for reissues, reprisals, and totally new weapons and exotics, 340 unique weapons have been added to the game since sunsetting was introduced for Beyond Light, and the overwhelming majority of the new additions, including raid weapons, have been largely forgettable. In any given season, here's what you get. 2 new unique exotics, one from the season pass, which tends to be okay, and one from the new dungeon or raid, which tends to be good, but niche. 5 to 6 new seasonal weapons that can occasionally surprise but are usually quite forgettable. 5 to 6 dungeon or raid weapons which have unique perks, competitive stats, and interesting perk pools. 5 to 6 new or returning world drops, most of which served as alternatives to better weapons. 1 average to above average ritual weapon. 3 playlist weapons that roll with 12 perks each and are very perk dependent. 1 to 2 holiday event weapons that are usually just bad. 2 trials weapons rotations and their adepts. 6 nightfall weapon rotations and their adepts, and 1 competitive weapon every 2 seasons. That works out to be roughly 30 guns a season, or 120 a year. Most of these are reissues, seasonal, and world drops that vary wildly in quality. With the game having to satisfy free-to-play and paid players, rewards have to be made proportional to the difficulty and accessibility. It's not a perfect system. Trials gave us unexpected resurgence, and the seasonal missions gave us the Eremite, but you're more likely to get better weapons from harder activities. You could argue that this abundance of riches is exactly why weapon reviewers are important. They're needed to sort the shite out from the good stuff. But as a weapon reviewer, you can figure this out by participating in the next problem for yourself, actually playing the game. For all seasonal activities and destinations except for Neomuna, your gun choice really doesn't matter. You're going to be able to kill everything pretty quickly with negligible time difference. On Neomuna, where you're locked to 15 power levels under, the difference in DPS per archetype is a lot more pronounced and easier to feel. In normal raids and dungeons, killing enemies usually isn't the problem. Nothing feels genuinely tanky or difficult outside of bosses. The only time you have to use certain weapons is to deal with champions, but that's not a difficulty thing, that's just a case of using the right keys for the right locks. Optimal DPS of course requires the right stuff, but most teams aren't optimal, nor do they strive for it. They aim to get it done and get the loot. For raids, it's more the whole staying alive and communicating with your friends thing that's the problem. Also, having friends to begin with, but this isn't a free therapy session. Come to the Twitch stream every Tuesday and Thursday night for that. The only activities where weapon selection and loadouts make a real difference to your efficacy is in any master level content and endgame challenges. Master Lost Sectors, Contest and Master Raids, speedrunning, Grandmaster Nightfalls, and solo dungeon clears. Also known as the pinnacle PvE experience that the vast majority of people playing this game will not clear or complete. There's no in-between when it comes to Destiny's difficulty. It's either way too easy or really hard. Legend level content is supposed to be that in-between point, but in reality, it just requires you to be patient and do a bit more ad clearing than normal before you proceed. I could talk about the issues with Destiny's difficulty all day, but that's not the point I'm trying to make here. Essentially, Destiny 2 has two tiers of content: everyday Destiny content, and the content that really matters. The content that matters is the content that gives you the best weapons, the new exotics, the endgame materials, and the triumphs and seals for your collection. So when it comes to reviewing a weapon, the question becomes, is it good enough to use in the content that really matters? And to get somewhat of a feel for that, you go to Neomuna or you do a Legend Lost Sector solo. That's pretty much it. Eventually, you end up with just a handful of options that one can consider good. Everything new coming in better be as good, if not better, than this establishment. And that leads to the next problem: the culture of god rolls. God roll culture is exactly what it sounds like. It's every permutation of, if it's not a god roll, it's not worth using. To be perfectly clear, I'm not dismissing the concept of a god roll at all. Recommendations are important to help others with limited time or interest to get the perfect version of a gun. But perfect is the enemy of good, and the obsession with god rolls routinely dismisses more fun or interesting rolls. Recently, I believe this mindset has spread from just weapon rolls to entire weapons themselves, even though necessity to do so is the driving force here. We're getting over 120 weapons per year. It's easier for everyone to compare the new weapons coming out to the current established options and go from there. However, doing this turns people off from the off chance that a new gun genuinely provides a fun gameplay experience. A prime example of this is Necrochasm, which for all intents and purposes is an ad clear monster. You get a precision kill with the weapon, the target explodes, and that explosion can cause a chain reaction. It's a really fun and satisfying gameplay loop, which has very little downside when you factor in that auto rifles are some of the better primaries at the moment. Yet when I pointed this out in my review, the most common response was that Osteostriga can do what Necrochasm can do with half the effort. Therefore, Necrochasm is a bad weapon. This isn't totally inaccurate. Osteostriga is the king of ad clear, and it's so strong because you don't need to aim at all. Pair it with necrotic grips and nothing really gets the chance to ever kill you. But just because Osteostriga is best in slot for ad clear doesn't mean that Necrochasm is automatically bad. Far from it. I'd say Necrochasm is far more engaging and satisfying to use, whilst Osteostriga is a point-and-hold simulator. Something being better doesn't invalidate the joy of using something else, nor should it. After all, satisfying gunplay is what's kept Destiny around for so long. Weapons are supposed to be fun to use above all else, aren't they? You wouldn't say In-N-Out is a bad burger joint because it's objectively worse than Culver's, would you? Well, maybe you would if you don't live on the West Coast or have taste buds, but I digress. For the last few seasons, any weapon I've covered has invariably been compared to a weapon in the same slot with the argument of, it's worse for these reasons, so it's not worth using at all. I refute this argument, partially because it reinforces the concept of power creep, but also because if a gun feels good to use and does the job, it should be considered for use. Unless you're doing the hardest content in the game, there's no reason to dismiss something for not being best in slot. Maybe I'm being dramatic, but from my perspective as a weapons reviewer, it does seem like the joy of loving weapons and shooting weapons is being lost to the wider audience. But at the same time, I don't blame them. I don't blame anyone for feeling this way, because the game is reinforcing a reality where your weapons don't matter. Right now we have 5 subclasses that are very mature and fleshed out in terms of abilities, aspects, and fragments. Finding combinations to create gameplay loops that can be chained is more satisfying to get right than any exotic perk on any weapon in the game right now. When you create a build that really gets going, it's Destiny 2 at its very best. It's a visual spectacle and a very addictive feeling of absolute power. It's easier than ever to get into build crafting, and the logic for constructing most builds is actually quite simple once you've done a few yourself. And if you do come up with a build yourself and it just works, the feeling of accomplishment you feel is intoxicating. Universally with all of these builds, the star is the abilities and how they synergize with each other. The less time shooting, the more spectacular it looks and feels. You only need your weapons for the bosses, and even then it depends on the boss itself. Why would I use Witherhoard and swords when Tractor Cannon can boost my throwing hammers? That's a specific example, but you catch my drift. As long as builds and abilities are this potent, weapons and gunplay will remain secondary. As long as there's no middle ground in difficulty, the fun factor of guns will be secondary to their potency. And as long as 30+ weapons come out every season, the likelihood of any of them being worth chasing is quite low. Together, all of these problems paint not an alarming picture, but certainly one that doesn't feel all that great. I don't think it's being done cynically or maliciously, it's just a byproduct of a lot of different things all coalescing to this point. But there's one more point I want to bring up that I think is worth mentioning, and it's a spicy one. PvP is the only place where weapons really matter. If weapons are meant to be the personal expression of your existence within the Destiny universe, then PvP is currently the only place where that expression is not only tangible, but appreciated as well. To win in PvP, you need to kill your opponents by hitting your shots better than they can. To do that, you need the right combination of guns, gun skill, game sense, and reaction time. Whether or not you are successful is directly related to how proficient you are with your chosen weapons, and if those weapons are suited to the task at hand. A Guardian's choice of weapon in the Crucible is the only part of Destiny which is a truly personal choice and expression. They choose this weapon because it best suits them and how they like to play PvP. Whether you go full meta or go full snipe line, the game is up for grabs. You could also say this is true in everyday PvE, where you can use whatever you want and call it personal expression. The difference is that there's no stakes, no difficulty, it doesn't matter. In PvP, it does. The game is not a foregone conclusion just because you decide to run something that's off meta. And the list of weapons that's unsuitable for PvP is actually quite short. With a few exceptions, the balance of weapons is remarkably good in PvP, allowing you to find success with whatever you want, provided that it's got a decent PvP-minded role on it, and it's got a decent PvP-minded person behind it. Builds and abilities definitely do help as well, but it's far harder to loop them. It's just you and your weapons first and foremost. This is how it used to be in PvE as well. But times have changed. I've already said a lot, and I don't want this to continue on with me becoming an armchair dev and giving out suggestions that are just not feasible. All I can do is give feedback. And my feedback is that in PvE at least, guns don't feel as fun to use anymore, unless they're being used as part of a build. Maybe it's enemy density requiring more powerful solutions, maybe the weapons have become genuinely boring, or maybe the best in slot weapons are just exactly that, too good for their own good. I don't know what the solution is, but I know there's a problem here. And I want to finish this video by handing it over to you. Do you think that Destiny 2 is more fun when weapons are the focus? Or do you prefer the ability spam power fantasy that we have right now? Is Destiny 2 losing its way with respect to being a shooter first? And more importantly, would higher quality weapons at the cost of quantity solve the issue of loot being bad, or would it accelerate power creep? Let me know your thoughts. I'm very curious to hear from all of you. As ever, thank you so much for watching, and a big thanks to the patrons who continue to make these videos possible. I'm Ascendant Nomad, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.